So I'm not a climate expert, unlike Richard earlier on. And I tend to use this little cartoon to say that when I'm advising people, I tell them up front that they better tell me what their needs are fairly clearly first before they get started. You know, suddenly a heated exchange took place between the king and the moat contractor. He had the specs, right, just off the wall, all that other stuff. But it was on the wrong side of the wall. Didn't understand the purpose. So I think the point is you got to understand the purpose. I mean, why are we here? Why are we doing this? This little photograph I took back in 1974. I was working for this fellow, Ed Backus, a Latvian who was the toughest guy I think I ever knew. We were packed off to northern Nigeria to do the first mapping of northeast Nigeria, and I ended up spending almost a year there. And one of the things that I visited there was Lake Chad. Just 2 years after this, we were all up in this area of northeast Nigeria. And you see in 1972, the thing was an incredible lake. And when you got there, there was waves and sand beach and everything. It's shrunk by 90% since then. It's just absolutely shocking. So anybody that denies there's climate change happening, they just need to visit Lake Chad again. Climate change is just one of our serious challenges that we have. We have a lot of challenges, and I think the right word is to call them challenges because, you know, they're not going to kill us overall. We're in for a big change, and that's why I think we're talking about adaptation rather than mitigation. I sat in a federal government committee a number of years ago that asked, should we be focusing on mitigation or adaptation? Everybody agreed, you know, the world's not going to stop burning oil anytime soon, so we better work on adaptation. And I think that's just what humans have been doing for millennia. In fact, a long time. Just reading a very interesting book I was telling someone about at lunch called Sapiens. It's Richard Gwynn from the Globe and Mail recommended it to me, and it's a very interesting book showing how humans have adapted incredibly over time. And I think we're more than capable of doing it. Geography is a science that kind of went to sleep in the early part of the 20th century because we kind of built the world out and technology didn't really change as we focused on war, but as we developed computers and computerized geography, it suddenly became far more important and is now more important than it's probably ever been in history. And it provides a context for us to better understand our world. So the things that I think the private sector can bring in helping us make climate data more accessible and make sense of climate data and mash it up, if you will, with other information to help us make decisions. I have three things. The first is technology. So I'm going to talk about technology I know something about. I didn't want to be the moat contractor and talk about stuff I don't understand, but GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, invented by a Canadian, Roger Tomlinson, over 50 years ago, who actually just died and still working at the age of 80 last year, has become a large technology worldwide for integrating geography into what we do. All of us have maps on our cell phones and we use it every day. I mean, it's hard to imagine today that you could get lost if you have a cell phone. It tells you in your GPS where you are, it tells you on the map the context of where you are. So it's really changing the way we think and act. It's changing the way we do environmental monitoring and assessment. We can now understand glacial melt far better than we could before. We can understand what urban heat islands are. We can manage our natural resources better. This was the very first use of it, but it's continued to be a major user of GIS, particularly as the world's climate changes. The forests are changing rapidly. The mountain pine beetle infestation in BC has killed 25% of the BC forest in just 10 years. It's amazing. Developing new energy resources. We know that we have to change our energy regime. Not just because oil burns carbon, because it's getting more expensive to get out of the ground. Not just expensive in dollar terms, but expensive in environmental terms. We need to better manage information about land. Who's doing what where? What are the land uses that are going to be hit by climate change? How do we mitigate those? How do we change them? There's many things that we have to do where land information is a key source of data for us. We have to improve our urban and regional planning. Already there's radical change taking place in planning, and we're moving away from the 1950s idea of industry here, commercial here, residential here, and moving to the idea of mixed-use development, transit-oriented development, to get away from the idea that we all have to drive. Walkability as a tool. Real estate sites now have a walkability index when you go to the house, and you can say, how better can I walk? Not only is it environmentally better, but it's better for us as individuals. transportation planning, big changes happening. I'm sitting at the table here with a fellow from Metrolinx talking about the $3 billion a year budget they have in building the transit system out for Metro Toronto. And there's a lot of things that they have to take into account, not just, they have to obviously take climate into account, people, existing transit, lifetime, many, many things that are happening around the world in transit planning. Utilities, we just heard a little bit about utilities. Utilities are undergoing a total transformation because the smart grid really is the existing mechanical grid, if you will, with the information system laid on top of it. So the information system in the draft plans, and the drafting department's records used to be about the electrical utility system. Now the information system is part of the electrical utility system. So information is becoming part of our systems as opposed to records about them. And that's a radical change for utilities that they're seeing coming along. Buildings, Al Gore said buildings consume 60% they're responsible for 60% of greenhouse gas emissions. And they last a long time. They're not like a car, which is dead in 11 years and you could replace it with something else. They take a huge amount, and energy, buildings are one thing that can become almost net carbon neutral or even better. Business management is changing rapidly, as we talked about, as Joe talked about. There's all kinds of opportunities out there that businesses are now using maps and GIS to look at. Where are my customers? If I put in a new store, do I cannibalize my existing sites? Where do people work in banking? Would they work? Where do they work? Where do they live? Where are they likely to bank? Many other things like that. Insurance. Understanding human health. How does climate affect the spread of diseases? How does malaria move around as the climate changes? How do other things move up here into areas that were cool enough? Public safety and security. As the societies are uprooted by climate change, there's going to be social unrest and violence. We're seeing this shocking thing in Paris, really about a social underclass starting to fight back. Preparing for and responding to these disasters that we know are going to become more intense. So these are all examples of things that need climate data, but they're also examples of things that are generating a huge amount of other information that's relevant to climate research. So GIS is evolving very quickly. It's been, over the last 50 years, it's gone through 3 generations. The first generation was about collecting data. The second generation was about making it available in the enterprise for applications. The third generation that's just arrived is about connecting them all together. All of these GIS, every GIS in every organization is being connected together into an interconnected platform that you can then just access on the web. So it's bringing everybody's data, everybody's technology, everybody's people together, and you get a framework for solving much more complex problems than you could ever think about solving before. WebGIS integrates not just maps, but other information. Connect to your enterprise, get at the enterprise data. Connect to big data and start sifting through your huge amounts of big data. Connect to social media and monitor tweets. We're funding a research initiative at McGill through the MyTex I've forgotten what the acronym stands for, but the PhD student is mining social media for racist and misogynistic terms and mapping them. It's just shocking, I mean, what you find on Twitter, what people will say to the public as long as they're not saying it out of their mouth. It's astounding. Collecting data real time, like the meter data, imagery, being able to connect models and bring those all together in a way that people can easily get at them and access them. So it becomes, if you will, a kind of a common platform where professionals who understand GIS well and work in it every day and understand it can publish their information in a way that knowledge workers and executives can get at. Developers can use that information to start developing applications and create an economy around it. So it's really supporting these multiple different communities. One of my favorite areas of research right now, the one that interests me the most, that I'm an engineer and by nature a designer, is this concept of geo-design. One of the things the engineering community has been guilty of over the last 100 years or more, since engineering became a discipline, is designing in isolation of the larger picture. And that's partly out of necessity. You just couldn't envision the whole thing. Our cities have grown organically. But more and more, we're starting to be able to handle much, much larger amounts of data so that we can actually do geodesign in an integrated way where we collect the data, do some analysis, do a design, get some feedback, evaluate that design, give feedback, change the design, and ultimately reach a decision that will be a better decision than we would have made had we did that building in isolation of what's around it. So this is what transit-oriented design is all about. How do you get you work, play, live all in one place and then move around on transit? So that's the first thing, is technology. The second thing is content. One of our biggest challenges, I heard this over and over this morning, is how do I get at the data? When I do get it, how do I know if it's any good? How can I reach it? So we've been doing a lot of work over the last few years with our user community at building a portal that we call the Living Atlas of the World. And this Living Atlas of the World provides landscape information, imagery, base maps, demographics, and we're really just creating a portal and pointing to our users' maps, and pointing to their models. So here's a screenshot of the map. It's very simple to use. It's a portal. I can go in and I can look at imagery or base maps or historic maps, and I can also just click on one of those and it'll launch it. So if I clicked on Earth observations, it now brings it down. I've curated this into some Earth observations maps. If I click on one of these, like the one on the bottom down here, current wind condition, I see what the current wind condition is across North America. And I just took this snapshot here about 11 o'clock this morning. So if I clicked on it, I would see that the temperature at the Yorkton Airport was 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was a 41-mile-an-hour wind. It's a U.S. site, but 41 miles an hour is pretty windy. 1.4 is pretty cold. I could also go back and say, look at a great freeze over the Great Lakes. This is a MODIS snapshot of last winter's Great Lakes, how they froze over, with an estimate of how much was there. And I could click on one of those and find a little bit more about that ice. We've also started taking some of our partners' data. In Canada, we use Environics Analytics as our partner. We now have 1,700 variables that we've put into a database and allow our users to take their maps and say, okay, enrich my map. So if I have a map of store locations, I can suddenly add 1,700 variables to that store location just by clicking on it. And I can get the lifestyle, I can get their income, I can get their propensity to buy cigarettes, propensity to buy pickup trucks, propensity to be environmentally conscious. So I can start doing an analysis of what the population looks like and all the economics around it. We also are spending a lot of time working with organizations promoting open data. Colin and I both sit on Minister Tony Clement's advisory board on open data. And we've been working now with a number of people in both the open data and open source community to make available tools to let them publish their data more easily and convince them that open is better, that we're better to open things up. And so if I have a model and people say, well, that's not a very good model, why? Well, let's go look at the data and let's understand a little bit more about what's behind that model. One of the projects that I've been working on now for about 4 years with actually not quite 4 years, 3.5 years with governments across the country is the Community Map of Canada. So this began as an initiative for us to take open data from the federal government and some provincial governments and knit it together into a high-resolution topographic map of the country. So far, we've got over 250 participants across the country. We have about 800 municipalities covered. We've now got 57% of the population covered with maps that are at the resolution of that one you see up in the upper corner there. That's just a 1 to 1,000 scale. So you show parcels, lots, addresses, buildings. And our goal is by July 1st, 2017 to have 100% of the country covered. We've got, and what we're doing is taking open data and bringing it to a common standard and having it maintained by the community. So this isn't an Esri map, this is a community map. This is we publish it and we support the organization in doing it, but this is about the community doing it. And we've established an organization called the Geo Foundation Exchange that municipal governments, provincial governments, federal government put their data into and then publish it. The federal government publishes out to something called GeoBase, a base map for Canada. Provincial governments use it in their spatial data infrastructures, and we're using it to publish an Esri map coming out of the Community Map of Canada. So this is an example of a type of exchange that I think is needed for climate data. And I think we need to have an exchange of some kind that's got some governance around it, as we do with this GeoFoundation exchange, and some processes that will allow us to easily curate and result in something like the Community Map of Canada. Instead of being base map data, it's climate data. The third thing, and it looks like I'm in sync with Joe here, is innovation. I think that the private sector in general, compared to governments today, can move quicker and be more innovative. Now, I think governments have an important role to play in enabling the private sector to be more innovative. And I'm not going to go into too much of this other than to say that GIS, by nature, integrates organizations. It breaks down those barriers because a map is, everyone understands. Maps cut across organizations. A common thing that connects organizations and people together is geography. If we're building a road or a new high-speed railway, we have to touch everybody. We have to touch the farmers. We have to touch agriculture. We have to touch environment. We have to touch natural resources. We have to touch municipal affairs, all kinds of things. And those silos that people operate in today across the world are being broken down. The web is breaking them down, but web maps on the web are breaking them down even faster, and allowing people to share resources and support much more collaborative approaches to working. So GIS changes how we think and act. It takes that science of geography and integrates it into everything we do. Whether we're measuring in the field, whether we're analyzing and predicting that, then we take those predictions and prepare a plan. We use that plan to do a design. We evaluate the design. We decide on whether we're going to build it or not. And when we do act and build on it, we have to manage it. So we need to embrace this as kind of a holistic approach. David talked about that in engineering, that we need to have that whole life cycle. And climate has a major role to play in that. And climate data will have a major role to play in those decisions. So we need to embrace this approach, make it pervasive, and involve our organizations and all of us together. In preparation, how much time do I have? 2 minutes, okay. So in preparation for this, yesterday I asked one of my staff, can we put together a quick website, a portal, to show off some of this. So this is a portal that we built yesterday let me just pull up the, here. And this is a climate change portal for Ontario. If I go home, it brings up this portal, the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, and I can go pick one of these. I could go to disappearing glaciers. And these glaciers aren't in Ontario, but this gives you an idea of what something we call a story map is. So the story map lets me go in here and click on and follow a story through, and I can find a story there. So it was in 19, you see a picture and a map, and you can see it shrinking. So this tells a story in a way that'd be very difficult to tell otherwise, because you've got some words, you've got a photo, and you've got a map. If I go back to the portal, I can go over here and I can pick that portal that we just stumbled across. We didn't know about this portal. Where's Ian? We didn't know about it. So we found the portal and we just connected it. And now I can access the Ontario climate change data portal without having to find a different way to search for it. I can go back to my home page again, and we took some of the data out of that and actually extracted some of your data and created a new service here, which is the % change in temperature from 1960 to 2095. And I can go in there and I can actually see the change in those various epochs of time. And we can see the effect, even at the model, Richard, a model at this scale is producing the effect around the lakes that you were talking about. So I was all worried about this last night, so I'm really glad to hear that the lake effect snow will still keep snow on Blue Mountain. Thank you very much.